Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the non-planning journaling and memory keeping part of my system and how I use them to manage my stress and self-care when I have a full plate and very little time. Before I begin, I wanted to take a quick moment to thank you for being here with me today. Whether you're new here or if you've recently subscribed, I appreciate you so much. And in case you are new here, I tend to be a bit chatty, so before we get settled in, I'd like to invite you to grab a tea, a coffee, or your favorite beverage of choice, whatever you need to stay cozy. So today I've got a tea with a little bit of milk, and somebody asked me recently what I normally am drinking when I share the tea or the coffee, which I thought was such a fun question. So today I brought the tea that I'm drinking. It's called Yorkshire Gold Black Tea, and I've been eliminating my afternoon coffee to see if it helps me with my sleep, and I've been substituting my afternoon coffee with a tea. And in case you missed it, I shared in my last video that I'd be writing letters to my subscribers in the month of February as my way of participating in InCoWriMo, and also thanking you so much for subscribing and supporting this channel. And as a bit of a fun update, I thought I would share really quickly that I have put together my little box of fun things that I'm going to be using to write your letters with. So I've got my stickers, I've got my washi tapes, I've got some postcards, some scrap pieces of paper, and of course stamps. I'm going to start working on the letters this weekend, and if you are interested in seeing any updates on what some of the letters look like, let me know. Obviously, I'm not going to be sharing any personal information about the people that signed up, just to respect everyone's privacy, but I'd be happy to maybe share a few things before I add any writing to it. And yeah, I'm really excited to get started, and if you've signed up for a letter, then look out for something coming from me in your mailbox sometime in February or early March. All right, I'm gonna turn my attention over to this stack of books that I have in front of me. So I realized that I haven't actually done a full video that shows all of the notebooks, journals, and planners that I am in for 2024. Honestly, I guess I've always been a multiple books kind of person, but I've never consolidated all of them and put it all together, and maybe that's something that I'll do in the future. For today though, what you see here is what I would classify or categorize as my fun or restorative category of books. These books are used less for planning and being productive, and more so to support my health and wellness and self-care plan. And I thought I would share what each of them are for and how I'm using them, especially when things start to get extremely busy in my life as they are right now. And that's not to say that journaling is my only hobby. In fact, I have an infinite amount of hobbies. Most of them are in the arts and crafts space, although I also really love to decorate my home. I love to dive into a project and give all of my focus onto it, but it's not realistic. And I find when I'm feeling really short on spare time, I just can't take on big projects like that, especially when they require a lot of time and focus and concentration. As much as I love grabbing my paints and working on my art skills, those are typically reserved for phases in my life where I have more spare time. And honestly, developing my art skills and painting more has been something that I have wanted to focus on for a really long time. And unfortunately, I've just come to accept that now is not the time that I can dedicate that level of dedication to the craft as I want. And I'm fully aware that I can take small steps and do small things to build up a habit, because it isn't really an all or nothing kind of thing. But sometimes when it comes to painting, the thought of doing it is exhausting to me. And I think the reason why is because, for me anyway, I'm not saying this is necessarily going to be the case for everyone, but for me, I often get overwhelmed with the smallest things when I'm feeling stressed out. And as an example, when it comes to painting, the idea of trying to grab my paints and mix the colors I want and do a sketch and wait for layers to dry and having to deal with the cleanup after, sometimes the thought of all of those steps is enough of a barrier to entry, because it feels really high effort in terms of needing to set aside a certain amount of time. And unfortunately, what happens is I don't do anything. And instead of maybe spending 15 minutes or 30 minutes a day indulging in something creative to unwind from the day, I end up feeling disappointed that I essentially talked myself out of doing something creative for me because it felt like too much effort. And that, to me, when that happens, is usually a signal that there's already a lot going on in my life. I do tend to have a pretty full plate, and part of that is my fault in terms of struggling to set really strong boundaries, which is definitely something I can work on. But it's also just the stage of life that I'm in right now and the reality of priorities that I have going on in my life. So I've learned that when I start to feel really overwhelmed, that even fun things don't really feel fun anymore, it can mean that I'm in danger of burnout. And I talked about that in another video. When I have chronic stressors, we know that if those are not dealt with, then I can find myself back in a burnt out state. And I also know that when I get stressed, the first thing that I do is I drop anything that is part of my self-care plan, because I tend to consider it as a nice to have as opposed to a must have. And people with ADHD have been found to experience and report higher stress levels compared to someone without ADHD. And if the thing that a person with ADHD is doing feels stressful to them, and their efforts to work on the thing are not well planned out, then it's really unlikely that however their approach is of getting that thing done is going to alleviate the stress that they felt. If I am trying to do something that has the potential to be stressful, then I try to plan around it or try to set myself up for success, so that when I sit down to tend to whatever it is, that task or activity or whatever it is, it actually does the job that it's supposed to do, which is to relieve my stress. I found this interesting study that talks about triggers of stress for adolescents with ADHD. And even though I am not an adolescent, I really resonated with these triggers. So they were when you have too many racing thoughts, when you're placed in unpredictable situations, and struggling to live up to one's own or other demands. And when I feel triggered and I feel very stressed and I have all these racing thoughts and there's a lot of like unpredictable situations that I'm in, if I'm reaching for a notebook and I'm trying to do something to relieve my stress, I have learned for myself that adding some structure around, I've almost narrowed down the purpose of the book somehow, and I've sort of eliminated all of that extra worrying or all those extra thoughts that I'm gonna be faced when I'm using these books. If I sort of proactively plan for that and almost at the same time relieve myself of my own demands or my perceived other demands, then I'm just gonna have a better time. And so how I've been treating these books is I've sort of catered them so that they work for me, and engaging with these books is something that is low effort and very like bite-sized, and I'll get into that in a sec, require very little thought or setup. So most of the time I can get by with just a pen. I don't need to have like all my stickers and washi tapes and paints and paintbrushes and all of that stuff. But I can if I want, but I don't have to. And that's the key thing, is like you can always add to it if I feel like I want to, but bare minimum that I need to get my use out of these books is a pen. And this might sound a bit contradictory because I'm probably over-explaining it a little bit at this point, but really just having very few rules and demands. So a little bit of structure, but whatever happens within that structure is very flexible. Okay, I hope that made sense. Now I'm going to talk about each of these books and what their purpose is, because they all serve a very different purpose, and I am not necessarily reaching for each of these every single day, because again, I don't want to place this demand on myself to feel some kind of pressure to be perfect about accessing these things. And for me, the less pressure that I place on myself, the less stress overall I'm feeling when I'm using these books. I will start with my 5-year. Okay, so I've mentioned this 5-year Hobonichi a few times in the past, and you'll see actually it is currently in a new cover because the last cover I used unfortunately ruined the actual book cover because it was a little bit too small. So I did go ahead and switch into this natural leather cover. I am working on a video separately that documents how this cover ages over time. So I filmed the unboxing of this so that I could see what it looked like straight out of the box, and then I'm planning on doing a couple of check-ins, and maybe I'll do either like a 6-month check-in or perhaps a year of using this cover. The reason why I wanted to get this book is because I have the worst memory when it comes to my life. I tend to remember like the big events and milestone events, or I'll remember the negative events. But overall, I was finding that the year was just passing by too quickly, and I would get to the end of the year and I would think, what happened this year? And it just felt like time was flying by too quickly. And so my hope with getting this 5-year was I could document anything I really wanted, whether it was large or small, significant or seemingly insignificant. And I loved the idea of having a 5-year record where you could go back and see what you were doing at 5 different time points in a 5-year period. I know some people use, and I will say originally I was hoping to get an A6 size because I was worried the A5 would be overwhelming. But by the time I decided that I wanted to start keeping this book, it was already May of last year, and so I couldn't find any A6s available that started in 2023, and I didn't want to wait till January 2024. So I ended up getting this 5-year. And I think it's been a good thing because I am someone who writes a lot and I have 5 years or so to fill up the pages. For a book like this, I would have loved to be adventurous with it and stuff it full of physical mementos of my life. Like, I've seen people put photographs in here, plane tickets, train tickets, stickers, receipts, all sorts of fun things. I've seen people watercolor in them, and they just look so fluffy and full, and they remind me of a really rich history book. And the cool thing is I could technically still do that because I will be in this book at a minimum for 5 years. But for the purpose of being able to maintain a book like this, I set this expectation for myself to say, all you need is a pen and all you need is to write something. And you don't even have to update it every day. In fact, I almost always batch update this book. It's rare that I will pull this out first thing in the morning, even though that was my initial intention, was to have this book as one of the first things that I opened every day to recap whatever happened the day before. But the reality is, when things get really busy and I have all these errands and chores to do in the morning, I don't usually have a lot of time to open up this book and work on it before I start work. Number one, for me, the trade-offs that I had to make were, instead of treating this as like a scrapbook of my life where I would have loved it, but it would have taken me extra steps to collect things and fuss about how it looks in the book, and then potentially worry about it getting so bulky that I didn't enjoy writing in it anymore. I stripped all of that out, and all I do is I use a pen, and I use this brush pen marker to write out the days of the week, and then I just write at the minimum. Here's an example. It doesn't even have to be anything profound. And obviously sometimes I write more. I backfilled most of the first part of the year because I did start this book in May. So I did backfill this a lot. I had been writing a sentence a day in a different notebook. So I transferred all of those over. So some of these are really like simple. And then I've started my second column, and occasionally, if I feel like it and I have the time and I'm in the mood, I will add something over on the right side. So this page is not typical, but it's pretty, where I received a bunch of ink samples from my pen pal, Danielle, and I just adore these inks so much, and getting Happy Mail is obviously a very happy thing for me that I would like to remember. So I swatched a tiny little bit of each of the ink swatches on this page because I received them on the 5th of January. Another example is when I literally only wrote one sentence. We had hot pot at my parents' house, and then because I had some space, I tried to practice some of my Chinese, which is terrible, but hey, I have 5 years to practice it. So I really love this book. It takes me less than 5 minutes to add an entry. If I'm batch updating, it maybe takes me 20 minutes or so. And now that I'm in my second year of using it, it feels even more exciting because it's like such a small time investment for what I think is going to be a really cool long-term gain, in that I will literally have a record of every single day for the 5-year period. And again, it doesn't have to be like romanticizing my life. It can just be like the most mundane, boring things. It really doesn't matter. And I have zero rules, except I try to keep up with it on a somewhat regular basis. But I just love this. And to me, I feel like there's a very low effort in maintaining this, and it really requires very little thought because the whole book is set up for me already in terms of the dates. And the only thing that I'm thinking about when I open it is just writing something down. So I'm a huge fan of this book, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this cover patinas over time, because I'm really hopeful that we can get it to a gorgeous caramel brown by the end of the 5-year period. It doesn't leave my house very often, so it is taking a while to patina, but I'll do a check-in every so often, and you can see the slightest bit of change on the front cover. So things are happening, but they are happening a little bit slowly. So that's my 5-year. The next book in my fun self-care stack is a long form journal. Now, I have had a long form journal in some shape or form since I was like 8 or 10 years old. And while the covers of those have changed over time, I've had a lot of really cute, like Dear Diary type books with the gold latches and the lock. I don't know if you ever had a book like that, but I've been keeping some kind of long form journal for a very, very long time. And while the covers or the books themselves have changed over the years, the act of opening up just a blank notebook and pouring all my thoughts onto a page has been a comfort for me that has really kept me grounded. And regardless of whether I have any other notebook in my life, whether I'm using a digital planner, an online planner, I'm always keeping a journal. So this is definitely the longest standing thing that I have had in my life. As I've gotten older, I have tried to be a little more reflective in my journaling. So as I'm writing in it, I'm trying to reflect on like how I'm feeling and what could be going on in my life that might be contributing to making me feel that way. Whereas in the past, it was a little more like, this happened to me and this happened to me and this happened to me. And it was very much like a Dear Diary kind of thing. Because I've been writing in a book for so many years, it's a safe space where I can just pick up this book, write in it, and it almost always makes me feel better. And sometime last year, I started experimenting with a standard size notebook because I had been using like an A5 size notebook, and sometimes the size of the page felt a little overwhelming for me to complete, and I like that this feels a little more compact. I don't know for sure if it's less writing to fill up a page, but it certainly feels that way. And I currently have these 2 little charms that were on my very first cat's collar. So unfortunately, she passed a couple of years ago, and it has taken me a long time to move past that loss because she was with me since my undergrad. I decided to keep her little charms. This is backwards because it has my old cell phone number on it, but I decided to use these as the charm for this book. And I currently am experimenting with dedicating a pen to this book, because then I don't have to carry around my pencil case with me. I can just have this book with me, and when I need to open it up and use it, I have a pen right here. This has currently got a sterling ink 520 page blank notebook. I had previously been using a different brand. I do have a video on that, but it didn't have enough pages, and I actually got through that journal within a few months. So when I bought this, I was hoping that this would last me for at least a year. And I've written about this much so far. So we've got quite a ways to go. And I didn't buy one of those plastic covers for this book, which I regret now, but because I'm in Canada, I didn't really want to pay the shipping to get just the cover, so I just took the paper you get in packages and I made a book cover for now. And I actually put the string through this paper cover, and I reinforced it a little bit. I don't know if you can see, but I reinforced it a little bit with just some clear tape. So I'm expecting that this cover will not last forever, but I wanted to be able to have this book in the cover without having to put a string through the book, because in my last book I did that and the string ended up ruining the spine of the book a little bit. So this has been working for now, and we will see how long it holds up. It's obviously not the prettiest, and I never bothered decorating it because I didn't know how long this cover would last, but it's actually done pretty well. All I do is I date it and I just write. And again, I don't have really any other parameters. It's just pen, it's writing. Sometimes I write on one page, sometimes I write on two or more. And I really love it. I very rarely actually go back and read my old entries, but this is really like a place to process and improve my self-awareness and reflect on what's going on in my life. And it's kind of like my first line of defense for helping me when I'm feeling that I'm struggling. And something that I do have in here as well, if I'm ever feeling a certain way and I'm struggling with the vocabulary to understand how I'm feeling, I do have feelings wheel. I just found something online and printed it out, and essentially if I'm feeling a certain way, I can use this wheel to help me determine how I'm feeling. So if I know I'm feeling bad and I want to maybe dig into that feeling a little more, I might look into the bad column, and I might be like, am I bored? Or maybe am I feeling indifferent? Am I feeling overwhelmed? Sometimes I start here. So if I know I'm feeling overwhelmed, maybe I look here and I'm like, is it overwhelmed because I'm feeling bad? Is it overwhelmed because I'm feeling fearful? So I really like having this, and I find it also kind of helps to blot the ink a little bit. So, and I also have a pencil board in case I need it, but haven't really needed it now that I'm further into the book. I've decided not to do a full review of this notebook because I think this might have been a seconds notebook, so it doesn't feel like it would be fair, but it is kind of falling apart a little bit in certain areas. So there were times when I was worried I wouldn't make it through the end of the book because it felt just a little too bulky, and I worry about whether the pages will last. But I'm just going to stick with it for now because I invested in it and it is working for the most part. So that's my journal. And again, I like that this feels very low effort. It's just a book. There's no rules for what I have to say. And very occasionally I might throw in a sticker or two if I feel like it. But when I say very rarely, I mean very rarely, especially because this is quite thick and I do not want it to chunk up too much because then it will be unpleasant to write on. Having a blank book where I can process my thoughts is something that I could never get rid of. And maybe the form will change. I mean, I've thought about maybe downsizing to an A6. I've thought about going back to my trusty A5. I don't know, but having a blank notebook for that purpose is definitely the most important book in my entire lineup. All right, so the last book that I have is my A6 fun journal. So this one is brand new to my lineup in general. I've never really had something like this where I sort of dedicated a day to something fun. And I have to say, this is quickly becoming one of my favorite books in my fun self-care lineup. I do have the matching weeks, which I use to track my health and wellness, but this is more of a functional kind of book, whereas this counterpart is very much just for fun. So I have almost no rules for this book, and because it's so small, it's doing exactly what I was hoping it would do, which is it takes me like 2 to 5 minutes to play around in this book. And because I have no rules for it, it's just become this really fun collection of whatever I feel like doing. And right now that's mainly playing with fountain pen inks. I can do a really quick flip through to show you how it's going. So for the monthlies, I've just been adding stickers as I feel like it. I've also been using it to swatch different inks that I've been trying in my different pens, noting down particularly like fun events that are arts and crafts and stationery related. Then for the dailies, again, I've just been honestly having a blast. Like, this page is so small that it really doesn't take much to fill it up, and it's just been so satisfying. Like, it's less about processing my thoughts and, you know, feeling really like, sometimes when I use my long form journal, I can feel a little bit drained. I mean, most of the time I feel better, but this is just very light and like exactly what it needs to be. It's very low effort, and filling up a page just takes so little time. And if I feel like using stickers, I will, but if I don't, I don't have to. And so on this page, I put out what I started the month with because I thought it'd be interesting to see where I end. My pens kind of run out of ink whenever they run out of ink, and I don't have like a large pen collection. So instead of having like a new lineup at the beginning of every month, I'm just tracking like where I'm at, and I will probably track where I'm at the end of the month. So maybe not the prettiest pages, but this was me trying out this new sketching pen that I had gotten that I'm really excited to use. Some stickers I got from my pen pal. I made a note on some knitting needle recommendations if I ever were to upgrade my knitting needles. Some like more ink swatches on these new inks that I got. Playing around with different inks, some more ink swatches, some stamping, and then trying out inks and different pens. And this is kind of where I'm at this point in the month, where some of my pens have run out, so I've started inking them with like different inks. So it's a lot of ink right now. Here is me comparing the different line widths to I have these sketching pens. I'm not really sure what they're called, but they're like permanent sketching pens with different line widths. So I was just playing around with trying to compare my different nibs to the liner pens just to see how different they were. Playing around with some of my Deco Rush. I saw these really cute little crocodiles on a notebook that I thought were really cute, and I don't need a new notebook, but they really stood out to me, so I kind of sketched them out just so I could remember them. This is blank, so I might go back. Today I inked a new pen, so that's why this page is here, and then maybe I'll go back and add something here. So it's just been really fun to have a book where I have even less rules, because some of my other books I'm so concerned about keeping them as slim as possible because writing isn't a priority. But here, if this thing becomes really bulky, I don't think it's going to bother me too much because I'm not really using this book to write long paragraphs or anything like that. I just want to have fun and have a place to play with like my stationery items. And what I love about this is, first of all, this cover is it just makes me smile. And I've been reaching for this during little breaks in the day as a way to disconnect for a moment. So if let's say I find myself with like a half an hour break in between meetings, sometimes I'll go for a walk, and sometimes I'll just pull out this book and grab a pen and start playing, or I'll grab some stamps. Honestly, I just love the fact that there's a little bit of structure, because I think if I tried to emulate this in a completely blank notebook, it wouldn't be as effective, because I feel like I do have motivation to fill these out so that I can kind of get a sense of my whole year at a glance, even if I'm not necessarily going into this book every single day. And in any case, I'm having a lot of fun using this book, and it doesn't feel like work. I have no expectations on myself for how this is going to look, and I think I need something like that in my life, because I do tend to be very organized, because I have learned that that is one way that I've been able to cope with some of my struggles with ADHD. And so as someone who can sometimes overcompensate and try to overplan things to a point where that can also have, negative impacts in my life, it's been really fun to have outlets like this where I can reach for it. I can just scribble or do whatever I want, and I can keep it contained, so it's not like I'm pulling out my entire gouache set and paintbrushes and feeling like I really need to do like a sit down art session with myself. It just feels so much more casual and relaxing. And in comparison to that, I do have this scrapbook that I keep in one of my traveler's notebook blank inserts. And I wouldn't really classify this as like low effort, because honestly, it usually takes me a bit of time to do my little collages. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love putting these together, but I'm usually doing this when I have more time. So like maybe I'm watching a movie and I feel like relaxing and adding a page to my scrapbook. So this is the kind of thing where this feels like work, if that makes sense, compared to something like this where it's just so light and quick. So I don't actually reach for my scrapbooking TN that often, but I do usually save little bits of like stationery things, and once in a while I will open this up and I'll work in here, but I would almost kind of classify this as like a medium to high effort for me anyway. So even though I really like it, I don't actually use it as much. But it is fun. All right, well, that is all that I had for you today. If you're still here, thank you so much for sticking with me and joining me today for a quick overview of how I'm using these books to help me manage my stress and keep up with my self-care when I have very little spare time. If you have any questions or thoughts, I'd love to hear them in the comments below, and I'd love to know what you like to do to help manage your stress and keep on top of your self-care when you have very little time. I want to thank you all for your time today, and I hope you're doing well, and I will see you soon in the next one. Bye.